The scorching August sun beat down on the parched earth of Black Hawk, Colorado in 1878, turning what had once been fertile farmland into cracked wasteland. And Samuel Fletcher watched from his family's porch as Zara Anderson's father loaded the last of their possessions onto a weathered wagon, taking away the girl who wore his grandmother's ring on a chain around her neck. He was 19 years old, she was 18, and they had made promises under the cottonwood tree by the creek before it dried up. Promises spoken with trembling voices and hands clasped so tight their knuckles turned white. Promises that felt as permanent as the mountains rising behind them. Samuel's throat burned with dust and unshed tears as he stood frozen, watching the wagon wheels kick up clouds of dirt that seemed to mock the rain they desperately needed, watching Zara's pale face turn back toward him one last time before her father snapped the reins and the horses lurched forward. His own father had died 3 months earlier, leaving Samuel alone to tend a dying ranch with no water, no crops, and now no reason to keep fighting. The drought had started small, just a particularly dry spring that everyone assumed would break with summer storms, but the storms never came. Week after week, the sky remained a pitiless blue dome overhead, and the creek that ran through the Anderson and Fletcher properties slowed to a trickle, then to scattered puddles, then disappeared entirely. Samuel had proposed to Zara in May, before they understood how bad it would get, presenting her with the delicate gold band that had belonged to 3 generations of Fletcher women. Her parents had given their blessing, pleased that their only daughter would marry the solid, hard-working young man whose land adjoined theirs. They had planned a September wedding, had talked about building a house halfway between both properties, had mapped out their future with the confidence of young people who believed love could conquer anything. But love could not make it rain. By July, the Andersons' cattle were dying. Their garden was a graveyard of withered stalks, and Zara's mother had taken sick with what the doctor said was consumption brought on by malnutrition and despair. Samuel had tried to help, riding the 3 miles between properties every day to carry water from the one struggling well that still produced a thin stream, to help Mr. Anderson slaughter the weakest cattle before they died on their own, to sit with Mrs. Anderson and read to her from the Bible while Zara prepared what little food they had. He watched the girl he loved grow thinner, watched the light in her green eyes dim with exhaustion and grief, watched her hands become rough and chapped from endless work. Mrs. Anderson died on August 10th. They buried her in the small cemetery on the hill, and Samuel stood with his arm around Zara's shaking shoulders while the preacher read the funeral rites in a voice hoarse from the dust. 3 days later, Mr. Anderson made his decision. He had a brother in St. Louis, who ran a successful mercantile business, who had written repeatedly urging him to give up on Colorado and come east, where there was water and opportunity. For years, Thomas Anderson had refused, proud of the life he had built in the territories, but his wife's death had broken something inside him. He could not watch his daughter starve. He would not bury her beside her mother. Samuel had ridden over the morning they were packing, his horse's ribs showing through its dull coat, his own clothes hanging loose on his frame. He found Zara in the barn, methodically wrapping her mother's china in old newspapers, tears streaming down her face. When she saw him, she set down the plate she was holding and walked into his arms, pressing her face against his chest. They stood like that for a long moment, breathing in sync, memorizing the feel of each other. "I will come back," she had whispered. "As soon as things are better, as soon as I have saved enough money, I will come back to you." "I will wait," Samuel had promised, his voice rough. "I do not care how long it takes. I will be here." She had pulled the chain from around her neck, the one that held his grandmother's ring and tried to give it back to him. He had closed her fingers around it, refusing. "You keep it. It is yours. You are mine and I am yours, and nothing changes that." "Nothing changes that," she had echoed, and they had kissed with desperate intensity, trying to pour all their love and longing and fear into that one connection. Now she was gone, and Samuel stood on his porch watching the wagon disappear into the heat shimmer on the horizon. When he could no longer see even the dust cloud, he turned and walked back into the empty house. The silence pressed against his ears. His mother had died when he was 12, his father just months ago, and the house that had once rang with voices and laughter now felt like a tomb. He poured himself a small measure of whiskey, the last of his father's bottle, and drank it standing at the window. Then he rolled up his sleeves and got to work. If Zara was coming back, he needed to have something to come back to. The next 3 years were the hardest of Samuel's life. The drought finally broke in the spring of 1879, but by then, most of the families in the area had left or lost everything. Samuel survived by selling off his cattle one by one, by taking work wherever he could find it, by living on beans and hardtack and stubbornness. He worked as a ranch hand for the few spreads that had made it through the drought, as a guard on supply wagons running between Denver and the mining camps, as a carpenter when the railroad pushed through and needed men to build depots and water towers. He saved every penny he could spare, slowly rebuilding his herd, repairing fences and buildings, coaxing life back into the damaged land. He wrote to Zara faithfully, sending letters to the address in St. Louis that her father had left with the postmaster. In the beginning, she wrote back regularly. Her letters spoke of the strangeness of city life, of working in her uncle's store, of missing the open sky and the mountains and him. She still wore his ring on the chain around her neck. She still loved him. She was saving money. She would come home. But as months turned into years, the letters became less frequent. Her uncle's business was struggling, she wrote. Her father had taken sick and needed care. There were debts to pay, always more debts. She could not leave yet, but soon, she promised. Soon. Samuel's letters to her never changed. He told her about the ranch, about the progress he was making, about the foals born each spring and the way the creek was running clear again. He told her he loved her, that he was waiting, that she had a home here whenever she was ready. He never pressured her, never complained about the waiting, even as it stretched from months into years. A promise was a promise, but after 2 years his letters started coming back unopened. "Moved, no forwarding address," the postmaster told him with a sympathetic shake of his head. Samuel stood in the small post office, staring at the stack of returned envelopes, feeling his heart crack. He asked the postmaster to keep trying, to check with St. Louis to find out anything, but there was no information to be found. The Andersons had left the address Zara had given him, and no one seemed to know where they had gone. Samuel rode into Denver and spent a week searching through city records, asking at churches and boarding houses, trying to find some trace of Thomas and Zara Anderson. He found nothing. It was as if they had vanished. On the long ride back to Black Hawk, he made himself face the possibility that she was gone, that she had met someone else, that she had decided to build a new life without him. The thought made him physically ill, but he forced himself to consider it. If Zara wanted to be free of her promise, he would let her go. He loved her too much to hold her to a commitment she no longer wanted. But somewhere deep in his chest, in the place where he carried the memory of her laugh and the feeling of her hand in his, he did not believe she had forgotten. Something had happened, something had kept her from writing, but the girl who had looked at him with such fierce devotion before she left would not have abandoned their promises without a word. So he kept working, kept rebuilding, kept waiting, By 1881, the ranch was thriving again. Samuel had a good herd of cattle, 3 strong horses, and fields of hay that would see him through the winter. He had hired on a boy from town to help with the heavy work, and together they had repaired the barn and fixed the roof on the main house. At 22, Samuel was still young, and more than one family in the area had made it clear that their daughters would welcome his attention. But he wore the memory of Zara like armor, letting no one else close. He had made a promise. In late September, he took a load of cattle to sell at the stockyards in Central City, a booming mining town 15 miles north of Black Hawk. The sale went well, and Samuel found himself with more money than he had seen in years jingling in his pockets. He treated himself to a hot meal at a decent restaurant, a bath and a shave at the barber, and a new shirt at the general store. The proprietor, a talkative man named Higgins, was full of gossip about the town's growth, about the new theater being built, about the restaurant that had just opened on Main Street. "Run by a woman from back east," Higgins said as he wrapped Samuel's purchase. "Brave thing, making her way alone out here, though I suppose she had no choice after her father passed. Name is Anderson, I believe, Mrs. Zara Merritt." Samuel's hands froze on the package. "What did you say?" The restaurant owner. "Zara Merritt. Widow woman, came here about 6 months ago. Makes the best apple pie I have ever tasted, I tell you." Higgins continued chattering, but Samuel was no longer listening. The roar in his ears drowned out everything else. Merritt. She had married someone else. The knowledge hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. But she was here. After all this time, she was 15 miles away, and he had not known. He forced his lungs to work, forced his mind to function. "Where is this restaurant?" "Main Street, right across from the Imperial Hotel. You cannot miss it. Has a sign out front with a pie painted on it." Higgins grinned. "You planning to get some supper there? Tell Mrs. Merritt that Higgins sent you." Samuel mumbled something, grabbed his package, and walked out into the street. The September sun was warm on his face, but he felt cold all over. Zara was here. Zara had married someone else. Zara had been 15 miles away for 6 months while he waited for letters that would never come. He should get on his horse and ride back to Black Hawk. He should let her live her life with her husband. He should forget about promises made by children before the drought took everything. But his feet carried him down the street toward the restaurant, and he could not seem to stop them. He needed to see her just once. He needed to know that she was alive and well. Then he could let her go. The restaurant was small but clean, with cheerful yellow curtains in the windows and the promised sign hanging above the door. Through the glass, Samuel could see several tables occupied by miners and businessmen enjoying their supper. His heart hammering against his ribs, he pushed open the door. The interior was warm and welcoming, smelling of fresh bread and roasted meat. A woman in a blue dress and white apron stood at the far table, setting down plates for 2 rough-looking miners. She was turned away from him, but Samuel would have known the line of her shoulders, the curve of her neck, anywhere. As if she felt his gaze, she turned. Zara Anderson looked at him across the crowded room, and Samuel watched all the color drain from her face. The coffee pot in her hand wobbled dangerously. For a moment, neither of them moved, frozen in a tableau of shock and recognition. Then Zara's knees buckled, and Samuel lunged forward, catching her and the coffee pot both before they hit the ground. The hot liquid splashed across his new shirt, but he barely felt it. "Zara," he said hoarsely, and her green eyes filled with tears. "Samuel." His name was a broken whisper. "Oh God, Samuel." The miners were half out of their seats, concerned and curious, and several other patrons had turned to stare. Samuel helped Zara to a chair, his hands shaking, barely able to process that she was real and solid and here under his fingers. She was thinner than he remembered, her face more drawn, but her hair was still the same rich auburn, her eyes the same deep green. She wore no jewelry that he could see, no ring on her left hand. "I am fine, gentlemen," Zara managed, her voice steadier than her hands. "Just a dizzy spell. Please, continue with your meals." She looked at a girl of perhaps 15 who had emerged from the kitchen, eyes wide with alarm. "Hannah, can you see to the customers? I need a moment." The girl nodded, and Zara stood carefully, gesturing for Samuel to follow her through a door at the back. They walked through a hot, cramped kitchen where a Chinese cook was stirring a large pot, then out into a small yard where crates of vegetables were stacked beside a chicken coop. Zara turned to face him, wrapping her arms around herself, and in the fading daylight, Samuel could see she was trembling. "I thought I would never see you again," she said, and a tear spilled down her cheek. "I thought you must have given up on me, must have married someone else." "I wrote and wrote, but you never answered, and I thought your letters never reached me," Samuel interrupted. "After 2 years, mine started coming back with no forwarding address. I looked for you. I rode to Denver. I searched everywhere, but I could not find you." Zara's face crumpled. "Papa moved us 4 times in 2 years. He was drinking after Mama died. He could not hold a job. My uncle finally threw us out, and we ended up in a boarding house in a terrible part of the city. I wrote to you from every address, but I never heard back, and I thought—" She pressed her hands to her face. "I thought you had decided I was not worth waiting for." "Never." Samuel took a step closer, his whole body aching to pull her into his arms, but the name Higgins had spoken held him back. "I waited. I am still waiting. I will always wait for you, Zara, but I need to understand. The man in the store said you were Mrs. Merritt. He said you were a widow." Zara's head snapped up, her eyes widening. Then understanding crossed her face, followed by something that looked like anger. "Mrs. Merritt was my landlady. When I opened this restaurant, everyone assumed it was her establishment, and she never corrected them because she thought it would be more respectable if people believed a widow owned it rather than an unmarried woman alone. I never used that name, Samuel. I never married anyone. How could I when my heart was always here with you?" The relief that flooded through Samuel was so intense it left him dizzy. "You never married." "Never. I wore your ring every single day." She reached up and pulled a familiar gold band from beneath her collar, the chain glinting in the last rays of sunlight. "I kept my promise, Samuel. Even when I thought you had broken yours, I could not give you up. I could not stop loving you." This time Samuel did not hold back. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly he could feel her heart beating against his chest. Zara's arms wrapped around his neck, and she was crying in earnest now, great shaking sobs that he felt through his whole body. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her, hardly able to believe she was real. "I am sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I am so sorry. I tried so hard to get back to you, but Papa was so sick, and I had to work to support us both, and every penny I saved went to doctors and medicine. And then when he died last year, I had nothing. I had to start over. I came to Colorado because I had to be close to you, even if I thought you had forgotten me. I told myself I would build something here, and maybe someday I would be brave enough to ride to Black Hawk and see if you were happy. And if you were, I would leave you in peace." Samuel pulled back just far enough to cup her face in his hands, using his thumbs to wipe away her tears. "I could never be happy without you. I have been half alive for 3 years, just waiting for you to come home." "I am home now," Zara whispered. And then she was kissing him, or he was kissing her, and it did not matter because they were together again and nothing else mattered. The kiss was salt sweet with tears, fierce with 3 years of longing, tender with promises kept. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Marry me tomorrow, marry me tonight. I cannot wait any more, Zara. I need you to be my wife." She laughed, a watery, joyful sound. "Yes, yes, but we have to do it properly. I want a real wedding, Samuel, with a preacher and witnesses and oh." She pulled back, her expression suddenly stricken. "The restaurant. I have customers inside and Hannah cannot manage alone and I need this business. It is all I have. Then let me help." Samuel took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Let me be your husband in all ways, starting right now. We will go back inside, we will feed your customers, and then we will figure out how to build our life together." Zara studied his face for a long moment, and Samuel saw the moment she truly believed he was real, that this was not a dream. Her expression softened into something so full of love it made his chest tight. "Together," she agreed. "We figure it out together." They went back inside holding hands, and Samuel could feel every eye in the restaurant on them as they entered. Zara's cheeks were flushed, her eyes were red from crying, but she held her head high. "Gentlemen," she announced, "this is Samuel Fletcher. He is going to be my husband, and the best man I have ever known." A cheer went up from the miners, and one of them called out, "Well, give the lady a proper kiss then." Samuel was happy to oblige, pulling Zara close and kissing her thoroughly while the restaurant erupted in applause and whistling. When they broke apart, both grinning like fools, Zara shooed him toward an empty table. "Sit down and let me feed you. You look half-starved, Samuel Fletcher." He sat, unable to take his eyes off her as she moved around the room, refilling coffee and clearing plates, directing young Hannah with practiced efficiency. The Chinese cook emerged from the kitchen with a loaded plate, which Zara set in front of Samuel with a smile. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread. It smelled incredible. "This is what you have been doing?" Samuel asked as she poured him coffee. "Building this. I had to do something. Uncle Bernard taught me bookkeeping at his store, and I have always been good in the kitchen. When Papa died, I sold everything we had, pooled it with what little I had saved, and bought a ticket to Colorado. I knew I could not show up on your doorstep with nothing to my name, assuming you were even still there, so I decided to make something of myself first." She smiled sadly. "I wanted to be someone you could be proud of." Samuel caught her hand, holding it tightly. "I have always been proud of you. You survived. You took care of your father. You built a business on your own. You are remarkable, Zara." She blushed, and the sight of it made Samuel feel about 16 years old again. "Eat your supper," she said softly. "We can talk more when I close up." The food was delicious, and Samuel ate every bite while surreptitiously watching Zara work. She had always been capable, even as a girl, but there was a new confidence in the way she handled the customers and ran her establishment. She had grown in their time apart, had been forced to become independent and self-sufficient. Samuel felt a complicated mixture of pride and sorrow. He was proud of what she had built, but he mourned the years of struggle that had shaped her, years she should not have had to face alone. The customers gradually filtered out, and Zara flipped the sign on the door to "closed." Hannah helped clean the tables and sweep the floor, then ducked into the kitchen to help the cook with the dishes. Zara sat down across from Samuel, removing her apron with a sigh. "It has been a long day," she said, "but finding you at the end of it makes every moment worth it." "Tell me about these 6 months," Samuel said. "Tell me everything." So she did. She had arrived in Central City in March with just enough money to rent a tiny room above a saloon and buy basic supplies. She had started by baking pies and selling them from a basket on the street corner, gradually building a reputation. A businessman who had tasted her cooking had offered to lease her this space at a reasonable rate, and she had scraped together enough to open the restaurant in May. It had been brutally hard work, long hours, constant worry about money, but she had made it work through sheer determination. "I have 6 regular customers who come in every day, and word is spreading," she said. "I am not making a fortune, but I am covering my costs and putting a little away each month. In another year, I might have enough saved to actually buy this building, or maybe a bigger place." Samuel listened, marveling at her strength. When she finished, he told her his own story of the last 3 years, of the work he had done, of rebuilding the ranch. "It is not much," he admitted. "The house needs work and the barn needs a new roof, and I am still building back the herd. But it is ours, Zara. It is the home we plan to make together." "It sounds perfect," she said, her eyes shining. "When can I see it? Tomorrow, if you can spare the time, or tonight, or right now." He laughed at himself. "I am sorry. I just do not want to let you out of my sight. I keep thinking I will wake up and this will all have been a dream." Zara reached across the table and took both his hands in hers. "It is not a dream. I am here, and I am not going anywhere ever again." They sat like that for a long moment, just holding hands and looking at each other, relearning the faces they had carried in memory for so long. Samuel could see the small differences the years had carved. A faint scar on her temple, a few freckles she had not had before, tiny lines at the corners of her eyes from squinting in the sun. But she was still his Zara, still the girl he loved with every fiber of his being. A discreet cough from the kitchen doorway made them both look up. Hannah stood there, looking uncertain. "Begging your pardon, madam, but Chen says the dishes are done and we have prepared everything for tomorrow. Is there anything else you need?" "No, Hannah, thank you. You and Chen go on home. I will lock up." Zara stood, reaching into her pocket and pulling out some coins. "And here, take this. You both did excellent work today." The girl's face lit up. She accepted the money with a grateful smile, then disappeared back into the kitchen. A moment later, Samuel heard the back door close. Zara moved around the restaurant, banking the stove, checking the locks, blowing out lamps. Samuel watched her, thinking how domestic it all was, how right it felt to be here with her. "Where do you live?" he asked. "Upstairs. There are 2 rooms above the restaurant. They are not fancy, but they are mine." She hesitated, then added, "You could come up if you want. I know it is not proper, but Samuel, I have been without you for 3 years. I do not want to spend another night alone if I do not have to." Samuel stood, crossing to her. "We will be married as soon as we can arrange it. Until then, I will be a perfect gentleman. But I am not leaving you, Zara. Not tonight, not ever again." She led him up a narrow staircase to a small sitting room furnished with a worn sofa, a table, and 2 chairs. Through an open door, he could see a bedroom barely big enough for a single bed and a dresser. It was sparse, but clean and tidy, with cheerful curtains and a few wildflowers in a jar on the table. This was where she had lived for 6 months, alone in this tiny space, working herself to exhaustion while he had been 15 miles away, equally alone. "We have wasted so much time," Zara said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "Then let us not waste any more." Samuel drew her down onto the sofa, and she curled into his side as naturally as breathing, her head on his shoulder. They sat in the lamplight, talking quietly about their plans. Samuel wanted to get married immediately, but Zara convinced him to wait 2 weeks so she could make arrangements for the restaurant, perhaps hire another girl to help so she could take a few days away. She had been working 7 days a week, and the thought of a honeymoon, even a brief one, made her eyes glow with anticipation. They talked until the lamp burned low, and Zara's voice grew drowsy. Samuel held her as she drifted off to sleep. her body warm and solid against his, and felt more at peace than he had in 3 years. Eventually, he carefully shifted her so she was lying on the sofa, fetched a blanket from her bedroom to cover her, and settled himself in the chair where he could watch over her. He did not sleep much that night, too wired with joy and relief and the simple miracle of her presence. When dawn light began filtering through the windows, Zara stirred and opened her eyes. For a moment she looked confused, then she saw Samuel and her whole face transformed with a smile. "You stayed. I told you I would not leave." She sat up, pushing her tangled hair back from her face. "I must look a mess. You look beautiful." Samuel meant it. She looked warm and tousled and real, and he loved her so much it hurt. They spent the morning together. Zara started the ovens and began preparing for the day while Samuel went to buy fresh supplies from the market. When he returned, Chen had arrived and was chopping vegetables with swift, precise movements, and Hannah was setting tables. The breakfast customers began trickling in, miners grabbing quick meals before their shifts, businessmen lingering over coffee and newspapers. Samuel made himself useful, carrying plates and refilling cups, learning the rhythm of Zara's establishment. The work was easy compared to ranching, but he could see how demanding it was to keep everything running smoothly. Zara was constantly in motion, cooking, serving, managing, greeting regulars by name and making newcomers feel welcome. By mid-morning, when the breakfast rush finally slowed, she was flushed and tired but smiling. "You are a natural at this," Samuel told her, catching her hand as she passed. "But you are working too hard," says the man who has been ranching alone for 3 years, she teased. "We both know how to work, Samuel. It is what we do." He could not argue with that. They had both been shaped by hardship, both learned to survive through sheer stubbornness and sweat. But now they could face the future together, and that made all the difference. Over the next 2 weeks, Samuel fell into a pattern. He would ride to Central City each morning, help Zara with the restaurant, then ride back to Black Hawk in the evening to tend his own property. The young man he had hired, David, was capable enough to handle most of the daily work, but Samuel still needed to oversee things and make decisions. It was exhausting, splitting his time between two places, but he could not bear to be away from Zara for more than a few hours. They made their plans during the quiet moments between customers. They would marry in Black Hawk, in the small church where Zara's mother was buried. Afterward, they would live at the ranch, and Zara would continue running the restaurant, riding into Central City several days a week to supervise. She was training Hannah to take on more responsibility, and Chen had proven himself entirely capable of managing the kitchen without constant oversight. It would be a balancing act, but they would make it work. Samuel used some of his savings to buy Zara a proper wedding dress from the dressmaker in Central City, a simple but lovely gown of cream-colored silk. She protested the expense, but he insisted. "You deserve to be a beautiful bride," he said firmly. "You deserve to have something special after all you have been through." On a crisp October morning, they stood in the Black Hawk Church and spoke their vows before God and a small gathering of neighbors who remembered them as the young couple torn apart by drought. Zara wore her silk dress and the gold ring on a chain around her neck, and Samuel wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Samuel kissed her with all the pent-up longing of 3 years, and the congregation erupted in applause. They held a modest reception in the church hall, with food that Zara and Chen had prepared and brought from the restaurant. The neighbors were generous with their congratulations and wedding gifts, pressing quilts and preserves and tools into their hands. Old Mrs. Henderson, who had known Samuel's mother, cried happy tears, and told Zara she was getting a fine man. Mr. Peters, who owned the ranch adjoining Samuel's, shook his hand vigorously and said it was good to see true love win out. As the sun began to set, Samuel and Zara finally escaped to the ranch, to the house Samuel had spent 3 years keeping alive for this moment. He carried her over the threshold, making her laugh, and set her down gently in the front room. The house was clean and tidy, with a fire crackling in the hearth and wildflowers in jars on the table. Samuel had spent the previous day preparing everything, wanting it to be perfect for her. Zara walked slowly through the rooms, touching the furniture, looking out the windows at the land spreading in all directions. "I remember this place," she said softly. "I remember planning how we would arrange everything, which room would be the nursery, where we would plant the garden." "We can still do all of that." Samuel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "We can build the life we planned, Zara. It is just starting a few years later than we thought." She turned in his arms, looping her hands behind his neck. "I do not care about the delay. All that matters is that we are here now." Then she kissed him, and kissing led to more, and Samuel carried his wife to the bedroom he had prepared for them. They made love with the tenderness of first times and the passion of years of waiting, learning each other's bodies, whispering promises and endearments in the darkness. Afterward, Zara lay with her head on Samuel's chest, tracing idle patterns on his skin. "I am your wife," she said wonderingly. "After everything, we actually made it." "We made it," Samuel confirmed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And I promise you, Zara Fletcher, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret keeping that promise." "I could never regret it. You are the best part of me, Samuel." "You always have been." They fell asleep tangled together, and for the first time in years, Samuel slept deeply and dreamlessly, with no grief or loneliness to haunt him. The following weeks established the pattern of their married life. 3 days a week, Zara rode into Central City to oversee the restaurant, check the books, and plan menus. Samuel often went with her, helping out during the busy lunch rush before returning to the ranch to handle his own work. The other days, Zara stayed home, throwing herself into making the ranch house into a real home. She sewed curtains, planted a garden, cooked meals in the kitchen she had once planned to share with Samuel. She also began experimenting with recipes, creating new dishes that she would introduce at the restaurant. Samuel watched her bloom in the life they were building. The thinness and tension that had marked her when he found her began to fade, replaced by a healthy glow and easy laughter. She was happy, truly happy, and that made every moment of struggle worth it. Central City's restaurant continued to thrive under the new arrangement. Hannah proved herself more than capable of managing the day-to-day operations, and Chen's cooking skills meant the food remained consistently excellent even when Zara was not there. Profits increased, and by Christmas, Zara had saved enough to buy the building outright. Samuel insisted on contributing half from his own savings, making them equal partners in both ventures. Their first Christmas as a married couple was a quiet, joyful affair. They attended services in Black Hawk, then returned home to exchange small gifts by the fire. Samuel gave Zara a beautiful shawl he had ordered from Denver, and she gave him a new saddle she had been secretly commissioning from the leather worker in Central City. They cooked a goose together, laughing and stealing kisses in the kitchen, and ate by candlelight at the table Samuel's grandfather had made. "Next year," Zara said, her eyes sparkling, "maybe we will have a baby to celebrate with us." Samuel's heart leapt at the thought. "You want children?" "Of course I do. I have always wanted your children, Samuel, a whole house full of them if we are lucky." He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. Then we will fill this house with children, sons and daughters who will never know what it is to be separated from the people they love." That night, they made love with new intention, and Zara whispered prayers into Samuel's skin, asking for the blessing of a child. Samuel prayed too, for the first time in years, asking God to grant them the family they had dreamed of. Spring came, and with it, changes. Zara woke one April morning feeling queasy, and by the time the doctor confirmed what they both suspected, she was glowing with happiness. She was carrying their child, due in late November. Samuel was overwhelmed with joy and terror in equal measure. He became almost comically protective, trying to prevent Zara from lifting anything heavy or working too hard. She tolerated his hovering with amused patience, reminding him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. As her pregnancy progressed, Zara reluctantly cut back her days at the restaurant to just once a week, focusing on the books and major decisions while leaving the daily operations entirely to Hannah and Chen. She spent her time at the ranch preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes and blankets, helping Samuel convert the small room next to their bedroom into a nursery. They painted the walls a soft yellow and built a cradle from pine wood Samuel had cut and seasoned himself. In late November, on a cold night when the first snow was falling, Zara went into labor. Samuel rode like mad to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Carson, an experienced woman who had delivered half the babies in Black Hawk. She arrived calm and efficient, shooing Samuel out of the bedroom and getting to work. He paced the front room for hours, jumping at every sound, terrified by the occasional cry of pain that reached him through the closed door. Finally, as dawn was breaking, he heard a new sound. A thin, wailing cry that made his heart stop. The bedroom door opened and Mrs. Carson emerged, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Fletcher, a healthy boy with a fine set of lungs. You can go in now." Samuel burst into the room to find Zara propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Samuel, come meet your son." He approached slowly, almost reverently, and Zara pulled back the blanket to reveal a small, red face, eyes screwed shut, one tiny fist waving in the air. Samuel felt something crack open in his chest, a love so intense and immediate it stole his breath. "He is perfect," he whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly tiny hand. The baby's fingers closed around his thumb with surprising strength. "He is absolutely perfect. We did it," Zara said, her voice thick with emotion. "We survived everything, and now we have this beautiful miracle." They named him Thomas, after Zara's father, with the middle name James, after Samuel's. Little Thomas Fletcher came into the world squalling and hungry, and he proceeded to turn their lives upside down in the best possible way. Samuel discovered he was a natural father, patient with the midnight feedings and endless diaper changes, content to walk the floor for hours when Thomas was fussy. Zara took to motherhood with the same competence she brought to everything else, though she admitted the sleep deprivation was worse than any work she had ever done. Hannah brought news from the restaurant weekly, and Zara continued to manage the books from home, but her focus had shifted entirely to their son. Samuel watched his wife with their child and felt his love for her deepen even further. She had survived so much, fought so hard, and now she was giving their son the secure, loving childhood she had lost. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Zara began talking about returning to the restaurant more regularly. Samuel could see she missed the work, missed the creative outlet and the sense of accomplishment. They worked out a new arrangement where Mrs. Henderson would come to the ranch twice a week to watch Thomas while Zara went to Central City. It was not perfect, but it allowed Zara to maintain her connection to the business she had built while still being present for their son. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper, and the restaurant's reputation grew. Samuel hired on another ranch hand, which gave him more flexibility to help Zara when she needed it. They talked about eventually expanding, maybe opening a second restaurant in Black Hawk, or building a proper hotel with a dining room in Central City. The possibilities seemed endless. Thomas's first birthday came and went, marked by a small party with neighbors and friends. The boy was walking now, tottering around on chubby legs, getting into everything, filling the house with laughter and chaos. Samuel could not imagine life without him, could barely remember what the house had felt like before his son's presence transformed it. That winter, Zara discovered she was pregnant again. The news was both exciting and daunting. Thomas was barely more than a baby himself, and the thought of two small children was overwhelming. But when Zara's worried eyes met Samuel's, he pulled her close and told her they would manage, just as they had managed everything else. Their daughter was born in early August of 1883, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and made Thomas hide under the kitchen table. The labor was faster this time, and by the time Mrs. Carson arrived, Zara was already close to delivering. 2 hours later, Samuel was holding a tiny daughter with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same green as her mother's. They named her Rose, after Samuel's mother. If Thomas had turned their lives upside down, Rose completed the transformation. Samuel had always heard that boys and girls were different, but he had not truly understood until he held his daughter and felt a fierce protectiveness that surpassed even what he felt for his son. Rose was smaller, quieter, more solemn than Thomas had been. She watched the world with serious eyes, as if she were carefully cataloging everything around her. With 2 small children, Zara made the difficult decision to sell her stake in the restaurant to Hannah, who had proven herself more than capable of running the business. It was bittersweet, letting go of something she had built from nothing, but Zara never regretted it. "I built that restaurant to survive," she told Samuel. "But this, our family, this is what I built it for. This is the life I always wanted." The years rolled on, busy and full. Thomas grew into an energetic, adventurous boy who loved helping his father with the ranch work. Rose was quieter, preferring to stay close to her mother, learning to cook and garden. In 1885, Zara gave birth to another son whom they named David. And in 1887, their youngest, another daughter named Clara, completed their family. 4 children made the house that had once felt so empty ring with constant noise and activity. There were scraped knees to bandage, fights to mediate, lessons to teach, and endless meals to prepare. Samuel expanded the house, adding on 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The ranch grew too, until Samuel had 3 full-time hands helping manage the cattle and horses. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Samuel would watch Zara at the kitchen table, helping Thomas with his arithmetic or braiding Rose's hair, and feel grateful beyond words for every moment. The drought and the years of separation felt like they had happened to different people, in a different lifetime. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Zara on a trip to Denver, leaving the children in the capable care of Mrs. Henderson and the ranch hands. It was the first time they had been alone together for more than a few hours since Thomas was born, and the freedom was both strange and wonderful. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate at fancy restaurants, and wandered the city streets holding hands like the young couple they had once been. On their last night, lying in the hotel bed with Zara drowsing against his shoulder, Samuel found himself thinking about the promise they had made under the cottonwood tree all those years ago. How young they had been, how naive to think love alone could sustain them through anything. And yet somehow it had. Not just love, but also stubbornness, faith, and sheer refusal to give up. "What are you thinking about?" Zara murmured, her fingers tracing lazy patterns on his chest. "About promises," Samuel said. "About how we kept ours even when it seemed impossible." Zara propped herself up on one elbow to look at him, her hair falling around her shoulders. She was 33 years old now, a mother of 4, and Samuel thought she had never been more beautiful. "It was not just the promise," she said. "It was you. It was knowing that somewhere in the world you were waiting for me. That gave me strength when I had nothing else. You gave me the same thing, purpose, hope, a reason to keep building when it would have been easier to walk away from everything." She kissed him softly. "We have a good life, do we not? I know it is not always easy, and there are days when the children drive me mad and I am so tired I can barely think, but Samuel, I am happy, truly happy. So am I." He pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I would go through all of it again, the drought and the separation and the years of waiting, just to end up here with you." "Let us hope we never have to test that," Zara said with a laugh. "I think we have had quite enough hardship for one lifetime." They returned to the ranch to find everything in chaos. Thomas had fallen out of the barn loft and broken his arm, Rose had come down with a fever, and David had gotten into the pantry and eaten an entire jar of preserves, making himself sick. Samuel and Zara exchanged a glance and dove back into the beautiful, exhausting reality of their life. The years continued to pass. Thomas grew into a tall, strong young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. At 16, he was already talking about one day taking over the family business. Rose, at 14, was quiet and bookish, spending hours reading anything she could get her hands on. She talked about becoming a teacher, about moving to Denver or even San Francisco. David, at 10, was the troublemaker, always getting into mischief, keeping everyone on their toes. And Clara, at 8, was the baby of the family, sweet and affectionate, adored by everyone. Samuel and Zara had weathered the challenges of child-rearing together, presenting a united front through illnesses and accidents, through the normal struggles of growing children. They had built not just a ranch and a family, but a true partnership, each supporting the other through every difficulty. In the summer of 1892, they received word that Central City was organizing a celebration for the town's 30th anniversary. As former business owners and long-time residents of the area, they were invited to attend. Samuel was initially reluctant to take a day away from work, but Zara convinced him it would be good to go back, to see how the town had grown, to visit the restaurant that had once been hers. They rode to Central City on a warm June morning, leaving the children at home with Thomas in charge. The town had grown significantly since Zara had left, with new buildings lining Main Street, electric lights strung along the major thoroughfares, and crowds of people everywhere. They made their way to what had once been Zara's restaurant and found it had been expanded, now taking up 2 storefronts instead of 1. A sign above the door read, "Anderson's Fine Dining," and Samuel felt Zara's hand tighten in his. "She kept the name," Zara said softly. They went inside to find the place packed with diners. A young hostess greeted them, but before she could show them to a table, a familiar voice called out, "Mrs. Fletcher, Mr. Fletcher, is that really you?" Hannah emerged from the crowd, older now but still recognizable. She had been a girl of 15 when Zara had hired her, and now she was a woman in her 30s, confident and poised. She embraced Zara warmly. "I cannot believe you came. When I heard you might attend the celebration, I hoped I would see you." Hannah gestured around the bustling restaurant. "What do you think? We have come a long way from those early days. It is wonderful, Hannah. You have done an amazing job." Zara's voice was thick with emotion. Hannah beamed. "I could never have done it without what you taught me. You gave me a chance when I had nothing, and I have never forgotten that." She lowered her voice. "I still have that first pie recipe you wrote out for me. It is framed in my office." They spent an hour catching up, learning about Hannah's life. She had married Chen, the cook, 5 years earlier, and they had 3 children together. The restaurant was thriving, serving over 100 customers a day, with a reputation that drew people from all over the territory. As they finally said their goodbyes and walked back into the busy street, Zara was quiet. Samuel pulled her aside, into the shade of an awning. "Are you all right?" "I am more than all right." Zara smiled up at him. "I was just thinking about how different my life would be if I had stayed here, if I had kept building the restaurant instead of choosing the ranch and our family. And Samuel, I do not regret my choice for even a moment. What Hannah has built is wonderful, but what we have built together is everything I ever wanted." Samuel kissed her, not caring about the people passing by on the street. "You are everything I ever wanted, Zara Fletcher. From the moment I first saw you when we were children until this very moment, you have been my whole heart." They attended the town celebration, dancing in the streets with hundreds of others, eating good food, listening to speeches and music. But the best part was simply being together, remembering where they had started and marveling at where they had ended up. As they rode home that evening, the setting sun painting the mountains gold, Samuel found himself thinking about the boy he had been at 19, watching the girl he loved disappear into the distance. If he could go back and tell that boy that everything would work out, that the promise would hold, would it have made the waiting easier? He did not think so. Some things had to be lived through, had to be endured to truly appreciate the happiness on the other side. They arrived home to find the house lit up, the children having waited up for them despite the late hour. Thomas had organized a surprise welcome home dinner, with all of them working together to prepare the meal. It was chaotic and slightly burned, but it was made with love, and Samuel and Zara ate every bite. Later, after the children had finally been shooed off to bed, Samuel and Zara sat on the porch in the darkness, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of cattle lowing. Zara's head rested on Samuel's shoulder, and his arm was around her waist, and everything was right with the world. "You remember what you told me the day I left?" Zara asked quietly. "You said you would wait, no matter how long it took. I remember every word we said that day. I knew even then that you meant it. I knew you would keep that promise. But Samuel, I did not realize until much later that you were not just waiting for me to come back. You were building something for us to come back to. You were keeping your promise in every choice you made, every day you got up and worked on that ranch. You were preparing a place for us." Samuel felt his throat tighten. "I had to believe you would return. If I let myself think otherwise, I would have fallen apart. So yes, every fence I mended, every animal I raised, every repair I made, I did it thinking about you coming home. I did the same thing in St. Louis, and then here in Central City. Every penny I saved, every skill I learned, I was preparing myself to be worthy of coming back to you. We were both working toward the same future, even when we could not see each other." Samuel turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "That is what a real promise is, I think. Not just words spoken in a moment of passion, but actions taken day after day, year after year, even when no one is watching, even when it would be easier to break it." Zara leaned forward and kissed him, soft and sweet. "I love you, Samuel Fletcher. I loved you when we were children playing by the creek. I loved you when you gave me your grandmother's ring. I loved you through all the years we were apart. And I love you now, more than ever, because I know exactly how rare and precious what we have is. I love you too. Until my last breath, Zara. Until the end of everything. They sat together in the darkness, two people who had been tested by circumstance and time and had emerged stronger for it. The drought had taken almost everything from them, scattering them across the territory, forcing them to become people they might not have been otherwise. But it had not taken their promises, and in the end, those promises had brought them home. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas did eventually take over most of the ranch operations, freeing Samuel and Zara to slow down a bit as they entered middle age. Rose went to Denver to attend the new women's college there, eventually becoming a teacher just as she had dreamed. David settled down somewhat as he grew older, though his mischievous streak never entirely disappeared. He became a skilled horseman and started a small business breaking and training horses for other ranches. Clara, their youngest, remained at home the longest, helping her mother with the house and garden, eventually marrying a young man from Black Hawk and settling just a few miles away. Samuel and Zara became grandparents for the first time when Thomas married a sweet girl named Margaret and had a son they named Samuel. More grandchildren followed, until family gatherings filled the house with noise and laughter. Samuel built a larger dining table to accommodate everyone, and Zara taught her daughters and daughters-in-law her cooking techniques, passing down recipes and stories. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children surprised them with a party. The entire family gathered, along with friends and neighbors from all over the area. There were speeches and toasts, and someone had even commissioned a cake from the bakery in Central City with Samuel and Zara Fletcher, 25 years, written in elaborate frosting. Samuel was embarrassed by all the attention, but Zara basked in it, her face glowing with happiness. Thomas stood up to give a toast, his voice carrying across the crowded room. Most of you know the story of how my parents met and married. How they were promised to each other before the Great Drought, how they were separated for years, how they found each other again and kept their promise. Growing up, I thought it was just a romantic story, something from a different time. But as I have gotten older, as I have built my own marriage and family, I have come to understand what that promise really meant. It was not just about love, though they certainly have that in abundance. It was about character. About choosing, every single day, to honor your commitments even when it is hard. Even when there is no one watching to make sure you do. My parents taught us all, through their example, that a promise is sacred, that your word is everything. That real love is not just a feeling but a choice you make again and again. He raised his glass. To Samuel and Zara Fletcher, may we all be half as faithful as they have been. The room erupted in cheers and applause, and Samuel saw tears streaming down Zara's face. He pulled her close, and she buried her face in his shoulder. "He is right, you know," she whispered. "We did something good. We built something that matters." "We built everything that matters," Samuel agreed. As the party continued around them, Samuel found himself reflecting on the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. If the drought had not come, they would have married young and probably lived quiet, unremarkable lives on their adjoining properties. They might have been happy, but they would never have been tested, never have learned what they were truly capable of. The suffering had been real, and he would not wish those years on anyone, but he could not deny they had been forged into stronger people by the experience. More than that, their story had become something larger than just the two of them. Their children had grown up knowing that promises mattered, that love could endure anything. Their grandchildren would hear the story and carry it forward. In a small way, in the community they had built and the family they had raised, Samuel and Zara had created something that would outlast them both. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Winters came and went, springs brought new life, summers ripened the hay, and autumns painted the mountains gold. Samuel's hair turned gray, then white, and Zara's face acquired the lines and character of a life fully lived. They slowed down, letting their children and grandchildren take on more of the work, but they never stopped working entirely. There was always something to do, always some way to contribute. In the spring of 1903, Samuel woke one morning to find Zara standing at the bedroom window, looking out at the land spreading before them. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing. Just how beautiful it is here, how lucky we have been." She turned in his arms to face him. "Samuel, we have been married for nearly 30 years. We have raised 4 children and welcomed 7 grandchildren. We have built a life that most people only dream about. And I just wanted to say, while we are both here and healthy and able to appreciate it, thank you. Thank you. For what? For waiting. For keeping your promise. For building this life with me. For being exactly the man I always believed you were." She cupped his face in her hands. "For loving me so well for so long." Samuel felt his eyes sting with sudden tears. "Zara, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Loving you has never been a burden or a duty. It has been the greatest joy and privilege of my life." They stood there in the morning light, 2 people who had weathered everything life could throw at them and had emerged victorious. Not because they had never struggled, but because they had never stopped trying. Not because love had been easy, but because they had chosen each other, again and again, through every difficulty. That summer, they took a trip with just the 2 of them, riding up into the mountains to a place they had discovered years ago when they were newlyweds. It was a high meadow filled with wildflowers, with a view that stretched for miles in every direction. They camped there for 3 days, swimming in the cold stream, cooking over an open fire and spending long hours just talking and being together. On their last night, lying on their backs looking up at the stars, Zara said, "If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Every moment of suffering, every year of separation, it all led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." "With me," Samuel said. "With you, always with you." They made love under the stars, their bodies familiar and beloved, their passion tempered but not diminished by years of marriage. Afterward, wrapped in blankets against the mountain chill, Samuel held his wife and felt completely at peace. The years that remained to them were good ones. They aged gracefully, their bodies slowing but their minds remaining sharp. They became the patriarch and matriarch of a large, thriving family, the center around which everyone else orbited. Their home was always full of visiting children and grandchildren, and later, great-grandchildren. Samuel died first at the age of 72, of a heart attack while working in the barn. It was quick and, the doctor said, painless. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone. The family gathered to mourn him, and they buried him in the Black Hawk Cemetery, not far from where Zara's mother lay. Zara lived another 3 years without him, continuing to run the household and oversee the ranch with the same competence she had always shown. But those who knew her best could see that something essential had gone out of her. She was still kind, still engaged with her family, but she moved through life like someone waiting for something. Thomas asked her once if she was all right, and she had smiled and said, "I am fine, dear. I am just ready when the time comes." The time came on a cold November night in her sleep. She passed away quietly at the age of 73, and they laid her to rest beside Samuel. The entire town turned out for her funeral, along with children and grandchildren from all over Colorado. The preacher spoke about her strength, her generosity, her unwavering love for her family. But it was Thomas, once again, who gave the eulogy that mattered most. "My mother and father had a great love story," he said, his voice breaking. "But it was not great because it was easy or perfect. It was great because they made it so. Because they chose each other, kept their promises, and built a life of meaning and purpose. They taught us that love is not just something you feel. It is something you do every day in 1,000 small ways. It is showing up, even when it is hard. It is keeping faith, even when you cannot see the path forward. It is believing in someone so completely that you are willing to wait years, to work endlessly, to sacrifice everything, just to be with them." He paused, wiping his eyes. They were promised before the drought took everything. But the promise held. Through years of separation, through hardship and uncertainty, through all the normal struggles of life and marriage and raising a family, the promise held. And because it did, all of us are here. Because they loved each other well, they built a family, a legacy, something that will continue long after we are all gone. The family laid roses on both graves, and as the sun set behind the mountains, turning the sky orange and gold, Thomas stood with his siblings, his children, his grandchildren, and thought about promises. About the ones we make, the ones we keep, and the ones that shape not just our own lives but the lives of everyone who comes after us. Samuel and Zara Fletcher had been two young people in love, torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. But they had refused to let that be the end of their story. They had fought their way back to each other, had built something beautiful and lasting, had proven that some promises are worth keeping no matter how long it takes or how hard it gets. And their story, told and retold by their descendants for generations to come, would stand as a testament to the power of love, faith, and unshakable commitment. In the wild, unforgiving landscape of 1870s Colorado, where drought could destroy everything in a season, two people had planted something that could not be killed by any hardship. They had planted a promise, watered it with tears and sweat and unwavering devotion, and watched it grow into a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's management, and then under his sons, and then his grandsons. The Fletcher name became synonymous with integrity and hard work in that part of Colorado, and every generation heard the story of Samuel and Zara, of promises made and kept, of love that refused to die. It became the foundation upon which the family was built, the standard against which all other relationships were measured. Because in the end, that is what a great love story does. It does not just tell us about two people who found happiness. It shows us what is possible when we refuse to give up on each other, when we honor our commitments, when we choose love not just once in a moment of passion, but every day in every decision, through every difficulty. Samuel and Zara Fletcher had done that. They had lived it. And in doing so, they had created something that would never die. Not a perfect love story, but a real one. Not an easy journey, but a worthwhile one. And in the end, that made all the difference.